have Mr. Lluís Bonet, who is part of the NCATC network. And this is how we kind of got in touch with him, and we are very happy to have him on the session today, on the conference. Mr. Bonet has a lot of experience and a lot to share, so I'll just give the floor to himself to start talking about revisiting borders and his own perspective on this. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much. It's a great pleasure to be with you today, to have this large group of people, young people that are working in the field of cultural management in different parts of the world, not only in Europe. So it's a big pleasure, and I'm really honored to be with you. As you probably know, I'm the director of the cultural management program at the University of Barcelona. We started it in 1989, so many years ago. And we have a PhD program on that, and we have many master programs and other. And we are as well involved in many European and international networks, and we are coordinating several international projects as well. So from this point of view, I will try to share my thoughts, and I hope these ideas, these concepts could be useful for you and for the rest of the conference. So the title is just the title of the conference, so Revisiting Borders, and I will talk mainly, I will use 3 keywords. I will talk about culture, I will talk about borders, and I will talk about crises. So these will be my 3 main topics, the connection among them. So I will start with culture. So when we talk about culture, we talk about the values, the identities, creative expressions, the heritage legacy, but as well, we talk about socialization. So culture means many things. It's not maybe the place for discussing on this polyhedric concept, but for me it's important because when we talk on this, we have to understand that in which way arts and culture are oppressing or liberating forces. And I think this is a clear issue because sometimes we see culture as a positive force, as a liberating force for human beings, but culture could be as well an oppressing force. And an oppressing force coming from the community, and traditionally, historically, this has been quite important, but it's also good comes from our own choice. So they lock us in comfort zones, in secure, sometimes in egoistic zones, and that is a possibility. So we use culture as a way to be comfortable in our own bubble, or culture, arts and culture, can empower us and makes us more critical citizens. But that depends mainly on ourselves. And it's important to see it and how we, cultural managers, we can do things in relation to that. So what kind of responsibility do we have as cultural managers and cultural operators? I think this is a very crucial question because we could be forces for liberating, or we can be just agents who supports this bubble system that everyone feels comfortable inside this bubble. So I think that's why it's important to reflect on that. So cultural managers, we mainly act as mediators between different agents, mainly mediators between artists and cultural professionals from one side, the participants to our proposals, to the people the consumers, the people who participate in our activities, the users of our activities, and finally, the regular citizens that maybe are not active participants, but in a way we need to think on them as well. So, as mediators, we need to think on the keepers and the way in the gates that we can open to them. No? And we do that taking into account the different logics. There are artistic logics, there are economic logics, there are social logics, there are political logics, and all these logics and all these agents are in tension. And we must be mediators in a field that agents and logics are in tension. And just to show you some of these tensions, I will just give you some dilemmas, some key dilemmas. which I think are very important, because and we have to give an answer or to position ourselves in relation to this. So are we agents for risk? And we are looking for risk, or we are looking for sustainability? Both the different kinds of sustainability. So in which way our main principle must be sustainability, or we have to open to risk? Or in which way we protect and we promote the preservation of cultural legacies, or we are a force for changing issues, for breaking these legacies, to give to people the freedom to break down what we receive from the past, what is our cultural heritage? In which way we work for a more equity and social inclusion society through culture, or we work on the excellence and artistic value? Of course, these key dilemmas is not white and black dilemmas. There are a lot of gray colors in between these dilemmas, and we must understand in which context we are and how we can take decisions or give the possibility for people to decide themselves. In which way we work from the institutional place, from the security of the institutionalization, or we support spontaneity, or we push passion and enthusiasm, or as cultural managers, we try to be the rational side, the ones who thinks on the viability, the social, the cultural and economic viability, and even the political viability of our projects. So what amount of our energy goes in this direction or into those ones? So these dilemmas, no? In which way we work for consolidate prestige? We use the symbolic value of consolidate prestige, or we are believers of artistic emergence, new people, young people, things which are not yet consolidated? Or do we want to support this kind of cultural activities that means a strong cognitive effort, or we support just entertainment? Or which kind of mix between cognitive effort and entertainment? Or even, are we agents of cultural diplomacy or on horizontal cultural cooperation? In which way we are using the funds, the money coming from cultural diplomacy tools, instruments, programs, in order to do horizontal cultural cooperation among different partners? So these key dilemmas don't have an easy answer, and will depend on in which context, in which moment, with which kind of community we are working with which kind of heritage, cultural heritage, or artistic proposal we are working with. But it's important to think on this, because it's really, really a key element. And that happens in a milieu with many different players. We are all the day in relation with players that each one of them are adding value to the proposals, but adding value from their own point of view. Is not the same the point of view of the sound technician, or of the producer, or the scenograph, or the museum curator, or the amateur performers, or the folkloric group, the member of a folkloric group. So in a way, we need to give to each one of them what they wish, what they need, but at the same time, taking into account that we live in a community. And in this community, everyone has the right to develop themselves. So in a way, how we encourage all these folks to develop their own creativity, and what is our role of cultural managers on pushing them, trying to give to each professional, each person involved, their own possibility of development. So these are some of the issues that I think are important when we try to understand how the culture, the arts and cultural sector works how we could be active agents of change, and what it means to be an active partner of change, and accepting that risk has a potential dangers, and that everything is not possible, that we have to think on this, and take into account that we live in a world that there are cultural policies, and there are we are part of a long history, more than 2 centuries of history of cultural policies. And when we analyze why we have libraries, why we have museums, why we have theaters, what all this cultural world change all over the centuries, and how cultural policies push them. So we need to ask ourselves why these cultural policy paradigms still exist. So in the 19th century, when the first cultural policy emerged, the main issues were the cultural heritage protection, the promotion of classical art, the promotion of libraries, of the reading activities, as well the promotion of artistic education. These were the first cultural policy paradigms, but we are still there. Many of our venues still work with this 19th century approach, and maybe it's not bad. We can maybe consider if classical art promotion is just the best way to do things, or if the copyright protection that started more than 200 years ago with the Berne Convention, what it means today. Or when after the Second World War, the paradigm of artistic excellence was really important, and there were a lot of changes in the way of doing cultural policy. And in the 60s, in the decade of the 60s, the paradigm of cultural democratization, the idea that culture, arts and culture and cultural heritage need to arrive to everyone. Everyone have the right to access to this culture. No? Or in the 70s and in the 80s, when the paradigm of cultural democratization started to be important, and it was a tension between cultural democratization and cultural democracy. Or in the 90s and in the beginning of the 21st century, that the paradigm of creative economy. So in a way, all these paradigms are here, but when we analyze what changed in the last years, what we see is very little change on cultural policy. And I ask this question, why do government cultural programs change so slowly? Maybe because we are not pushing them, maybe because they are in a comfort zone, because that is what the main users ask for. So should we continue to build libraries, to build concert halls, museums, music schools? Should we continue protecting and publishing the cultural heritage decided by the elites and subsidizing cinema or publishing books? I'm being very happy with all of this. I might say that from my individual point of view, I'm very happy with that, because I had been educated on this kind of culture, but I'm part of the elite. And I'm answering myself, why do we devote so few public resources to the expressions of emerging or marginalized communities? Why there are so few immigrants coming from other parts of the world who just arrived in our countries in the last decades? Why so few people from this origin attend our museums, our auditoriums, our concert halls, our theaters, even our libraries? That's probably libraries are one of the things most used for a large diversity of people. But I think it's important to think on this. Or are we prisoners of ourselves as lobby groups and vested interest groups? So when I'm going to the concert hall and I see around me and I see that most of the people looks like me, or when I'm going to a theater or to an art gallery or to a museum. So in a way, why we propose such a kind of programs? Maybe we are serving primarily what benefits cultural creators and producers, who are the ones who are proposing things. Artistic directors propose what they believe. And from the point of view of artistic freedom, this is it's great. I totally agree. But are we reflecting enough about in which kind of community we are? And when we are criticizing our politicians, when we are criticizing our economic system, are we as well thinking on our own responsibility? Are we just doing things for educated audiences, for the interest of cultural creators? So maybe we should be inspired by uncomfortable boundaries and design transgressive strategies that allows us to avoid obviousness, security, and vested interests. So I start talking on the word and the concept of culture. Maybe now it's time to go to the concept of boundaries. And I'm using this beautiful drawing that it was in a book by my colleague Milena Dražišević, and it was a drawing by a friend of her, Vaida Ramushik, and they allow me to do some changes to this beautiful drawing, because if we have when we knit a wool sweater, we think that in one side we have creativity, and in the other one we have community development, and we try to knit this wool sweater. But there is all this real politic force of slipping a stick on this knitting work. So in a way, when we work with culture and we try to see the boundaries, it's like knitting a special sweater and being in a way with the temptation of slipping sticks. And that's why we need to go and to try to see the concepts which are behind this. So what happens with the cultural rights, with the dreaming with other people, with the professional engagement, with interculturally, how we work together with all these concepts in order to do that. So going back to my three concepts, maybe we can go now a little bit deeper on the concept of boundaries, borders. What does it mean? Well, there are many kinds of borders. From a geographic point of view, we can talk about these known spaces. Just when we leave the city, we arrive to these known spaces, which are not rural, they are not urban. These are spaces that nobody takes care. These are borders. And in these borders, we can be inspired. Or we can be inspired by the social undesirables, the people who don't belongs to any place, or about the marginal art expressions, or the transdisciplinary formats, or the new ways of participation strategies, where we are sharing power, the programming power, with people that don't used to have any kind of power. So these are the kind of borders that maybe could help us in order to rethink, to transform ourselves, to accept change. So we must reinterpret and reimagine these two key words that are in the core, in the heart of our conference today. No? So we must reinterpret and reimagine the sense of our productions, the sense of our formats, and the way to dialogue with audiences and with artists. So the way we act as mediators, as cultural managers, mediators. So probably the paradigm of cultural democracy is one of the most valuable, which doesn't mean that the other paradigms doesn't have value. I still believe in the other paradigms, but maybe we need to to reflect, to analyze the limits of the cultural democracy paradigms, accepting that this paradigm is probably the most complex to implement. It's very easy to talk about active participation, empowering people, etc., giving the voice to others, but it's not as easy, because at the same time we want to promote excellence, we promote the freedom of artists, we promote the analysis of our cultural heritage roots, because all of them are as well important. So how we reinterpret, how we reimagine our products, the experiences that we want to push with our audience, with our community. So going back to the borders, it's probably a wonderful way to inspire ourselves. But there is a third main concept here: crisis. Well, we live in the middle of an unprecedented crisis. It's the pandemic crisis, it is a social crisis, it is an economic crisis as well, it's a cultural sector crisis, it's a political crisis. When we see how populism grows up around us, and when we see that the people who feel abandoned by the political forces, by the economical system, these people look back and are very easily manipulated by these same forces, and they dream about the former time when everything was easy, when concepts were just not complex, and when we saw the images of the people who went the last 6th of January in the United States Capitol, and we see all these white men, most of them coming from working class, that they want to feel comfortable in a secure place, in a safe place, in their own bubble. So how we work with this crisis, and at the same time, there is this huge economic crisis, this is a social crisis, there is a cultural sector crisis as well. No? So we are in a very deep social and economic crisis, and we are just going from confinement moments to new normality to outbreaks, and all these have a lot of disparate effects by cultural subsectors, by territories, by different communities. Not all of us, we are suffering in the same way this crisis. And this is a very particular crisis because it is very difficult to predict, given its global impact and the lack of previous references. So it's not easy to react to this crisis. So in which way we can work, and what is our responsibility as cultural managers? We are professionals as well, suffering in our everyday life, in our professional possibilities, in our work possibilities on this crisis. But we have a responsibility, and that is the kind of thing that I want you to think about. No? So it's affecting citizen cultural practices, and it's affecting professional cultural sector professionals as well. So both sides. And I will like to focus a little bit more on these two elements, because I think it's really very important in order to be sure that everything is working well. So I just will change to my microphone because there's a little bit of noise here. Sorry. How that affects citizen cultural practice. I will just show you some concepts of ideas which I think are important. So what we saw during the confinement, what we saw is a greater access to digital culture, and on those practices with previous background, and I think this is important, and that is very different depending the age of the people, the economic possibilities of the people, of the families. So there is an intensification of family cultural relations for one side during the confinement moment, but at the same time, we saw that this is quite different because that depend a lot on the kind of place that you live. So combining family life and telework or going to find a life. So it's really different. So the people that we work just from our house, it is totally different than the people who have to be in dangerous environments. No? So there is a fall in the economic capacity of families, and that has an effect on cultural consumption. People has less money to pay their bills, and at the same time there is a fear of participating in large events or in closed venues in the moments that we are allowed to do that. No, so many people are not going anymore. So we see that our cultural life is much more poor and is less dynamic. So this has, of course, serious effects in the short and medium term, but I wonder about the long-term effects on these changes in the cultural practice of citizens. And will the social gap widen due to greater asymmetries in the accumulation of cultural capital and in the access to technology, to the access to the right spaces on the educational resources? So we will see a big social crisis, a mid and long-term crisis, because we were not able to develop equity resources to people. And of course, there is the effect to the profession of the cultural sector. It's clear that this is a very heterogeneous sector. People working in the digital side of the cultural sector probably, and some enterprises that are specialized in the digital side of the cultural sector probably are very happy. They have a lot of work, or even in the institutional cultural sector, the people in charge of digitalization are working a lot, but other people's not. So that depends a lot of if you are a civil servant, working for a public administration, that you are receiving your salary, or an employee of the non-profit sector, or someone working as a freelance. So that is why the effect on the cultural sector is not only different because it affects more the live performing arts than other kind of cultural subsectors. But for me, what is really important is to think on how many vital projects, something which are really important issues, how maybe many of them will disappear. And that will happen despite the great resilience of the artistic work, because when you believe on something, and for you this is essential for your life, probably your resilience capacity is higher than in other cases. But the problem is that, do we need to just use this resilience as an asset, or this resilience capacity is as well a problem, because that means that so that's something that we need to reflect on, because this crisis is affecting all of us, and in many different ways. So I want to go back to these three key concepts and the relationship among them. No, we talked about arts and culture, about cultural heritage, how we and all the many faces of these expressions. We talk about boundaries. We talk about the borders and how the borders could be an inspiring force in order to to act as cultural mediators in a different way. And we talked about crises, the social crisis, the economic crisis, the political crisis, the cultural sector crisis, and how it depends and how it changes, and which kind of cultural landscape will emerge from this crisis, and what is our responsibility in order to fulfill and in order to develop our communities, to supporting artists. Many artists as freelancers are suffering a lot in this crisis, but also technicians, freelance technicians, especially in the field of live performing arts. Many people are not working, and of course, that could depend on which kind of country do you live, because in some countries, in the richest countries, there are subsidies for cultural professionals, but in the poorest countries, there are not this kind. And when we think about what happens to many artists when they don't have a job, so traditionally, they were waiters working in restaurants, but restaurants are closed now. So they can't just move to this kind of job in order to get some money and to survive. And maybe in some cases, they can work as educators in the field of artistic education, but even the field of artistic education is suffering and it's not as easy. So again, the key question is from an ethical point of view, what is our responsibility, how we could develop a better cultural sector, a better cultural crisis, what is our role as mediators between artists, cultural heritage professionals, for one side, the participants through the activities proposed by the cultural venues, by the cultural programmers, by the artists themselves, and the current citizen. These people who don't come to our auditoriums, who don't come to our libraries, who don't come to our museums, but they have their own culture. So in which way we are able to push change in cultural policies, to rethink cultural policies, and to rethink as well our way to do things. So that's mainly some of the issues that I wanted to share with you. And maybe we can just use these last minutes of this slot of time that we have in order to share thoughts, to share maybe nice experiences with you. So I want just to thank the invitation, the opportunity the conference gives to me to share my ideas, my thoughts, my worries as well with all of you, and to wish you ideas and capacity of changing the world. Young people, you are in probably in the best position to be transgressive, to change, to find new solutions, because maybe we, the old generation, we are leaving you a kind of world that is not probably the best one. So thank you for listening my ideas, my thoughts, and just I'm open to questions, to debate, to share with you in these last minutes that we have before the end of this session. So
yes, thank you very much for your presentation. It was all very refreshing to hear all your ideas, and thank you again for joining us for this event today. We do have, from what I can see, we do have a question from Stephen Hadley in the chat area. If you'd like, you can stop sharing your presentation now so that you can also have access to the chat. All right. I'm trying to.
I turn off my microphone. Sorry. No. Of course, I will share my presentation, so you could share the presentation with all the people there. So really, and well, so I didn't see the chat, so I don't see the question. I have to go probably to the chat, or maybe you can just read the question for me.
Yeah. Just a second. In the meantime, feel free to take a couple of minutes to drink some water or.
I don't know if there are other people who are sharing their thoughts in the chat.
Yes, so I think there is one from Mr. Stephen Hadley, who will also give a keynote speech to us. Mr. Hadley, please use the backstage link that I sent to you so that you can come and actually ask the question yourself. I think it would be more interactive this way. So you can find the link either through open a chat, an individual chat just for you, or you can see it from our previous conversation on email. So yeah.
Yeah, I'm reading now I see now the questions here.
Oh, okay.
Sorry,
Great.
I was not possible. I know where to see it. So Stephen Hanley asked, I'm interested to know if Lluís thinks that the progressive impulse within cultural policy will be lost in the crisis as we reset to an old way of thinking, or is there potential for major change? Well, that depends if I have my pessimistic hat or my optimistic hat. So in my pessimistic hat, I think that human beings don't learn a lot from crisis, and we are very conservative. So that has a good issue, which is that we don't lose valuable issues. And I think in traditional cultural policies, there are valuable issues. But at the same time, I think, and this is my optimistic hat, is the sense that, yes, we learn things. And we learn things, and through learning these things, we are able to change a little bit. So for me, the important issue is to accept complexity and to accept these dilemmas I was talking about. And the dilemmas is not between black and white. It's try to see in each context, in which kind of gray zone is the best one in order to push in the best direction. So I think in this way, things are better. No, so that could be a first answer. But of course, with Stephen, we can have a very long conversation, which and I'm sure it will be very interesting to listen him later when he will talk. There are as well a comment from Clara Roth-Witness. I really enjoy the idea that borders are not necessarily a limitation, but an opportunity, a new space that should be explored, or a community that should be empowered. Yes, well, I think that's, for me, it's an inspiring place. It's an uncomfortable place. Huh? It's not easy. There is not traditional beauty there. We need to open our eyes to this different kind of beauty who comes from the border, which is not sometimes in no spaces, for instance. I think in no spaces, no? Paulina asked me, you pose many questions, but now about answers? Well, I think there are answers. So for me, it's very clear that there are some answers. And an important answer is that curiosity, open our eyes, try to learn from the others. Risk, I think we need to risk. And these are the kind of answers. And I think what this conference is proposing, that rethinking, these are the kind, the revisiting. I think that is the main issue. So for me, these are the kind of answers. No? Solène Marier says, thank you for your presentation. I'm interested in hearing your thoughts on what kind of effects the crisis might have on the status of the artists, amateur, professional, and cultural participation. Well, we don't know yet the mid and long-term effects. We know the short-term, and people are suffering a lot, but suffering is depending who. Not everyone is suffering in the same way. I think that some of the most interesting pieces of art emerge during crisis moments. I think, for instance, on the avant-garde of the beginning of the 20th century. The First World War was a terrible experience for many people, artists included. And that creates, in the beginning of the 20s, a wonderful split of avant-garde movements. No? So I'm totally sure that will happen. And that it will be new things. And but at the same time, we will lose life, vital projects, because people won't be able to survive. So in a way, the cultural expression is the result of life. And it's true that if we go back to historical pandemics, they were much more disastrous than this one, because in this one, the medicine, it is in a much better position than before to support us, to help us. So that's why the number of people dying is less big than in previous pandemic disasters. But in any case, from our own standards, Western standards, it's an unprecedented crisis. So probably, and I want to I'll finish here because I know that there is other sessions waiting for us. But in a way, this crisis is showing us something which was just in the next door, very close. What artificial intelligence will change. So from my own perspective, artistic amateur life will grow a lot, because we will probably win time, and we'll need, and our work as mediators will be even more needed in the next future, because many people will lose their traditional jobs. People will have to change to new areas, and leisure and understanding leisure as a very important key force and positive force will be in it, and we will have a very important responsibility in relation to that. So Stephen Hanley asked, I'm interested to know if Lluís thinks that the progressive impulse within cultural policy will be lost in the crisis as we reset to an old way of thinking, or is there potential for major change? Well, that depends if I have my pessimistic hat or my optimistic hat. So in my pessimistic hat, I think that human beings don't learn a lot from crisis, and we are very conservative. So that has a good issue, which is that we don't lose valuable issues. And I think in traditional cultural policies, there are valuable issues. But at the same time, I think, and this is my optimistic hat, is the sense that, yes, we learn things. And we learn things, and through learning these things, we are able to change a little bit. So for me, the important issue is to accept complexity and to accept these dilemmas I was talking about. And the dilemmas is not between black and white. It's try to see in each context, in which kind of gray zone is the best one in order to push in the best direction. So I think in this way, things are better. No? So that could be a first answer. But of course, with Stephen, we can have a very long conversation, which and I'm sure it will be very interesting to listen to him later when he will talk. There as well a comment from Clara Roth-Witness. I really enjoy the idea that borders are not necessarily a limitation, but an opportunity, a new space that should be explored, or a community that should be empowered. Yes, well, I think that's, for me, it's an inspiring place. It's an uncomfortable place. Huh? It's not easy. There is not traditional beauty there. We need to open our eyes to this different kind of beauty who comes from the border, which is not sometimes in no spaces, for instance. I think in no spaces, no? Paulina asked me, you pose many questions, but now about answers. Well, I think there are answers. So for me, it's very clear that there are some answers. And an important answer is that curiosity, open our eyes, try to learn from the others. Risk, I think we need to risk. And these are the kind of answers. And I think what this conference is proposing, that rethinking, these are the revisiting. I think that is the main issue. So for me, these are the kind of answers. No? Solène Marier says, thank you for your presentation. I'm interested in hearing your thoughts on what kind of effects the crisis might have on the status of the artists, amateur, professional, and cultural participation. Well, we don't know yet the mid and long-term effects. We know the short-term, and people are suffering a lot. But suffering is depending. Not everyone is suffering in the same way. I think that some of the most interesting pieces of art emerge during crisis moments. I'm thinking, for instance, on the avant-garde of the beginning of the 20th century. The First World War was a terrible experience for many, many people, artists included. And that creates, in the beginning of the 20s, a wonderful split of avant-garde movements. No? So I'm totally sure that will happen. And that it will be new things. But at the same time, we will lose life, vital projects, because people won't be able to survive. So in a way, the cultural expression is the result of life. And it's true that if we go back to historical pandemics, they were much more disastrous than this one, because in this one, the medicine, it is in a much better position than before to support us, to help us. So that's why the number of people dying is less big than in previous pandemic disasters. But in any case, from our own standards, Western standards, it's an unprecedented crisis. So probably, and I want to I'll finish here because I know that there is other sessions waiting for us. But in a way, this crisis is showing us something which was just in the next door, very close. What artificial intelligence will change. So from my own perspective, artistic amateur life will grow a lot, because we will probably win time, and we'll need, and our work as mediators will be even more needed in the next future, because many people will lose their traditional jobs. People will have to change to new areas, and leisure and understanding leisure as a very important key force and positive force will be in it, and we will have a very important responsibility on relation to that. I don't know if I have an extra minute or we have to close here, because I see other questions as well, but maybe we can answer through email or through the chat. Andrea? I don't listen to you. Sorry.
Yeah, sorry. Yeah, so please, if you'd like to answer the questions, you can just copy and paste them to your own computer, and then.
Perfect. I'm doing it.
If you like think of answers, then we can put you in touch with them, or you can just use the people function on the chat and contact those people directly to have a conversation. And you can also like video chat, so it's all possible. But thank you very much for your insightful presentation, and we're now preparing for the next one that will start in about 4 minutes. So again, lovely to have you with us, and please do keep joining us for the whole duration of the conference until Saturday evening. Thank you very much again.
You're welcome. It was a big pleasure to be with you, and I hope my ideas, my thoughts were useful for this starting conference. And I really think it's a great opportunity, and I'm so happy to be with you today.
Thank you so much. Thank you. Have a lovely day. Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.